Hi there. Welcome to the Death and Sex Podcast. My name is Stephen Thomas, and with me always is my partner in crime, Dr. Kailey Bradley. Hi, Dr. Bradley.
Hello there.
Today we're going to be talking about neurodivergency because we happen to be a very spicy, neuro-spicy, divergent couple. How do you feel about that, Kailey?
I happen to think it's a little bit of a superpower to be neurodiverse. And we'll talk a little bit about our experiences, particularly being adults, receiving diagnoses later in life. We'll share a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the equivalent of flying or, seeing through walls, but it'll do as far as superpowers go.
If you could have a superpower, what would you?
I think I just said what my superpower would be if I could have one. I think I've already made that very clear. It would be flying or looking through walls.
I think I'd want the power of invisibility. I think that'd be kind of nice sometimes.
That's only because sometimes you would like to disappear.
Check out a little bit.
Just hide. Yeah, hide from the world. Well, no, actually, I know what your superpower would be because you say this all the time. I wish I could just be a dog. It'd probably be to be an animal of your choice.
Accurate.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. All right. So, let's talk a little bit about neurodivergence. So, Kailey, for you, when did you first realize or receive your diagnosis for your neurodivergence? And let's start there. What is your neurodivergence? How about that?
Yeah. So, at 32, I had to think there for a second. I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. Would have likely been under the Asperger's umbrella prior to kind of reconsolidation of diagnoses. And it is now autism spectrum disorder. I also, kind of a cool term, I feel weird saying this, but I'm also what's called twice exceptional, meaning I'm gifted in some areas and there are other nuances in my life that, and it may not be evident on the outside, but there are some things that I struggle with. So was diagnosed at 32. And I would say probably always knew a little bit that there was something going on. I like to say it often felt like there was this manual about how the world operated, how to human. And I just feel like I was always kind of waiting for my copy of that manual. So that's a little bit about my experience, and I'll definitely, share more. But what about you, Stephen? What is your particular flavor of neurodiversity?
I'm good old fashioned ADD.
Yeah. Tell us a little.
Go ahead. What?
Well, I was just going to share ask, do we want to jump into maybe how that kind of showed up for you and what led you to maybe, getting diagnosed yourself?
Sure. So I am ADD, technically ADHD, but definitely the attention deficit part for sure. Not so much the hyperactivity piece. So for me, I definitely for the longest time really struggled with being able to get shit done. If I wasn't passionate about it, I am a master procrastinator. I learned how to procrastinate really well. Got through high school, okay, A's, B's, and some C's, got to college when I was kind of on my own and really struggled once I got in, my sophomore, especially junior, senior year, just unless it was something I joked, I spent most of my time really in the theater or doing movie film stuff because I was a real film nerd back then. If it wasn't something that I was super passionate about, I would just not do it, wait till last minute to do it, usually up all night the night before writing the paper, and definitely my grades paid the price. So got out of college by the skin of my teeth and decided to go to grad school. And grad school was a little different because I knew I had to get A's, B's, or else the state wouldn't license me to be a counselor. So I knew I had to do it. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't really until the last couple of years when I was doing some individual counseling. I think I had an individual counselor said, you really sound, neurodivergent, ADD, ADHD, you should look into this. So I I ended up doing this assessment that you can do online. I'm not trying to plug anything because they're not paying us any money, but I did ADHD online because I didn't have insurance. It was the cheapest option. I think it was like $200, but they do take other insurances. And just did a 2-hour self-assessment and got an official diagnosis that I then took the results to my family doctor and explored, possibilities of medication. First of all, just the diagnosis in and of itself was very nice because it gave me some language to explain a lot of things about me that I think for the longest time I was, not necessarily, maybe a little bit explicitly, but definitely some implied comments about, I don't care, I'm lazy. These things, just show that you what's going on with you. There's something maybe deficient in you that you can't do this stuff. And so having the diagnosis was just validating in that, we say this all the time to our clients, we're not broken. You just got some stuff going on that the neurotypical person, the person that doesn't have ADHD, the person that doesn't have, isn't autistic, they just don't struggle with that in the same way that someone with neurodiversity would. And so it was very validating that, okay, great. And then tried a handful of medications, was kind of ready to stop that journey and give up until my doctor said, well, let's try this one last one. And it's a stimulant, and just, man, once that one in particular, I tried a couple different stimulants, but this one in particular, it was night and day. It was like, the way I like to explain it, because I'm a bit of a gamer, it's like somebody showed me how to turn down the difficulty of the game of life, to turn it down from hard mode to, at the very least, normal. And in some cases, even easy, of just like, oh, this is how it works. And I think we mentioned this in our last podcast, but yeah, we joked that it's my anti-asshole medication because, again, that higher level emotional functioning can be really hard for the neurodivergent person, especially the ADHD person. And so I have definitely noticed, I know you've noticed, that when I am taking my medication, I have the ability to be a little more just patient. And I think part of that is just the ability to think through stuff. What it does is and what the medication does is it just really helps me hone in and focus. And that's not to say they don't get distracted or it's not easier to go over here and do something else, but it gives me the ability to be like, okay, wait a minute. What am I supposed to be doing? Oh yeah, this. And I'm able to stay on track in a way that without it is harder. It's definitely much more difficult to like give it the attention that I want to. It's really easy if I'm excited about it. Mm-hmm. Because my brain's stimulated and I can just do it. But with the medication, it just does that extra step, especially if it's tedious stuff that my brain normally would just be like, I don't care. And honestly, wouldn't care until I had to care at the last minute. And then I'm like freaking out because I got to get this done. And then it's probably not done to, the best of my ability or quality because I'm scrambling. So yeah, that's me. Did I miss anything, Kailey?
No, I think you did a great job. It might be helpful for us to define neurodiversity.
Yeah.
It is a term that has gained some popularity, but it may not be familiar to all of our listeners. But, I'll just throw out the way I define neurodiversity. It's an umbrella term that kind of defines diversity in the way that our brains operate. And the core tenet of the neurodiversity paradigm is really that differences in the way that our brains operate are not deficiencies. Different does not mean broken. Different does not mean deficient. It just means different, right? So I just kind of wanted to define that term. You also used another counselory phrase, validation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important one also to spend a moment just kind of talking about. As counselors, we kind of say things a lot like, I validate what you're feeling. I hear you. I see you. But I sometimes think we don't, I guess we underestimate how vitally important that is. And in your experience, it sounds like having that diagnosis was really a way that you felt maybe seen. Your experience was labeled in a way that really helped. And I would argue that for me, same.
Yeah.
There were a lot of pieces and parts of of who I am and my, for me, I began to really notice that just the way I processed emotions was very intense. And I would have what we call meltdowns, where it was almost like my nervous system just was on overdrive, right? The volume was amped up to 1,000. And then I would exhaust myself, and then I would have shutdowns. And that cycle is very typical for folks with ASD. Sensory processing things. I was beginning to really observe that in myself, and also kind of an additional, and not necessarily, this is not specific just to folks with ASD, but definitely felt that I had a deep sense of really struggling when things didn't go as I planned, expected. That would kind of send me on a spiral if I had it in my head, like, okay, I need to do X, Y, Z today, or I had it in my head that this was going to be accomplished, and then life happens. Yeah. Man, that was really hard for me. So a little bit about my experience. I think there's often a lot of misconceptions, particularly about autism, primarily because early research on autism was done with white males. And so women were often kind of missed, fell through the cracks, especially highly intelligent academic females, because we did well in school. Sometimes the internal struggles sometimes just didn't get seen. So for me, I very much felt like you described a sense of validation in my diagnosis.
So maybe a good question here, and bringing into the fact that we're the Death and Sex podcast. A good question I think to ask would be, how has neurodivergence shaped our relationship or other relationships, romantic, family, or friendships? So, and again, don't feel like you have to go here if you don't want to, Kailey. There's no pressure for you to talk about this. I'm the sex therapist, so I feel a little more comfortable. But I definitely want to acknowledge that not having the diagnosis definitely helped with me in terms of, like, especially if we talk about sex. I think for a long time, I definitely used things like masturbation as a way to, like, regulate. I think that's a lot of what masturbation can be for some people, is especially men, because we're culturally much more acceptable for men. We masturbate to regulate. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, that can be a really good thing. There's a lot of benefits to masturbation. Maybe we should do a whole episode on masturbation. The thing that I think was validating is that, why is masturbation in particular such an easy coping skill? Because, when we talk about sex, all the dopamine, the vasopressin, like all that stuff that gets released in your brain that helps you stay stimulated, engaged, it's very powerful for the neurodiverse brain that is, more often than not, maybe looking for some stimulation, looking for some ways to hone in and focus. And so definitely having that, I think, because I think the other thing that a lot of people struggle with, Kailey, and you can tell me your thoughts about this, but maybe I'm too sexual, or I'm hypersexual, more than I should be, or more than my partner is. And just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with liking sex or wanting to have sex or lots of sex. I think when we masturbate frequently, every day, day in, day out, maybe multiple times a day, can that impact your romantic relationship with a partner or other partners? Absolutely, But again, for the neurodivergent person, sometimes it can be really helpful in that, again, that word validation, to validate that, this is why it's so easy for me to go to this and cope with this because of my neurodivergence, especially with ADHD. It can be helpful to just hone in and focus. And then a side caveat is working with clients that are ADHD, it can be very easy when they're in the act of having sex to lose interest or get distracted because, again, the ADHD brain, it's so easy to diverge over here, go there, think about the list of things I have to do. And working with them and giving them the ability to be like, okay, when that happens, be kind to yourself, take a breath, refocus, relax. I think it's very common to feel like when I'm having sex with my partner, it has to be how it is in the movies or in the porn videos or in my spicy novel. Like I'm in it and I'm going until boom, like we're both have accomplished what we set out to do. And being kind to yourself in that moment and saying you're allowed to take a break, you're allowed to redirect and then come back and re-engage. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It sometimes can be a really good thing. Yeah. So I thought that was just important to throw in there when we talk about romance in particular for the ADHD person. What are your thoughts? Anything you want to piggyback on anything I just said, or you want to go in a different direction?
Well, I think neurodiversity can intersect with both of our passion areas, grief and sexuality, because I think there's expectations that, sexuality need to look a particular way. There are expectations that grief have to look a particular way. And I think for those of us who are neurodiverse, we often maybe beat ourselves up when things don't look a particular way. And for me, getting diagnosed was almost a sense of like, oh, this is okay, right? Like it's challenging. And sometimes with diagnosis, it can be overwhelming. But I think allowing ourselves, as you're sharing, just that self-compassion that, life does not look like we maybe expect it to. It doesn't look like it does in the movies.
No, it doesn't.
That's okay. And
it is okay.
Mm-hmm. So giving ourselves a lot of self-compassion, I think, is key.
Yeah. And that can often be hard to do. Very hard.
Why are we so hard on ourselves? I know it's a big question, but gosh, I think every client we counsel probably is not being very kind to themselves when they, start working with us.
Yeah. Well, I think if we had the answer for that, we would be millionaires, right? And we'd be able to, close down and just live off of that magic answer. Because obviously I think it's a whole host of things. I do think we tend to be just in general self-critical. But I do think, especially when we talk about neurodivergency, whether it has to do with grief, whether it has to do with sex, whether it has to do with relationships, I think because we don't fit into the mold, or we feel like we don't fit into a mold with neurodivergency in particular, it's very easy to compare. We're not neurotypical, or we don't think the way that other people think, or process the way other people think. And so again, there's that notion, I must be broken. Like there must be something wrong with me that I can't do this the way that other people do. What's wrong? And that's where, especially in the work that I do around sex, I'll have a lot of people that come to me and say, I'm a sex addict, which, breaks my heart because first of all, one, that's not a diagnosis. There's no such thing as a sex addiction diagnosis. Definitely we can validate that you're using sex a lot to cope with something. But again, there's that idea that just because you might masturbate, every day or every other day, or you're kind of always in, desiring to have, sex, that doesn't make you necessarily broken. Definitely, if you're engaging in sexual behavior that's disrupting your life, your relationships, things like that, that's a problem. And let's talk about that and let's figure out what's going on. But I think for a lot of people, just in general, we go to this place of as soon as we're doing something that's not typical, whether it's neurotypical or something else, it's really easy to go down that rabbit hole of like, well, I'm just a terrible human being, or I'm just not good enough. And that's always hard to do. I know, and I can't remember if we talked about this in our last podcast, but I remember, being neurodivergent when I think we were engaged, and you told me, I had come home from work. I had homework to do because we were finishing up our grad program. And I said to you, hey, it'd be really nice just playing some video games. And you said, well, that's your form of self-care. Go do that. I know for me, that was a huge moment for me. Thank you, by the way, because I was able to just like, I'm allowed to be a little different here in how I do this. I'm allowed to explore the fact that it's okay to take care of myself in this manner and then go and do the work. Like I don't have to do things in a certain order. I'm allowed to be a little different. And I think that gave, particularly with my ADHD, which I didn't know at the time, I think that gave me a little more permission to be my authentic self. I didn't have to keep trying to be something that I wasn't, which is, I can, if I have something to do, I'm going to hone in and I'm going to do it till it's done. and then go have fun and play. The problem with that, especially if you're ADHD, if you hone in to do your work and you've got ADHD and your attention span, you know, average attention span is what, like 15, 17 minutes, something like that. Your ADHD attention span is going to probably be even less. And so you're going to get distracted. Your brain's going to go elsewhere, and it'll be 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And all of a sudden, oh, I'm not doing my work, and I've just wasted a half hour. And so that normal hour task or half hour task becomes 3 to 4 times as long because you keep getting distracted. And then there's no room for the thing that you're passionate about or the thing that you might like to do to just take some of that self-care time. So that was, I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of went a couple different tangents, but why are we so critical, especially when we have neurodivergence? I think because we don't always operate the way we think we should. And there's that idea, that shitting all over yourself that we talked about for sure last podcast.
Yeah. I also think there's some cultural dynamics at play here. I was just reading this really interesting snippet in a book that somebody asks actually the Dalai Lama this question, like, why are we so hard on ourselves? And
well, interesting.
That was very foreign to him. He didn't even know how to answer that question. But it's so deeply ingrained in Western culture. I also think we kind of have this misassumption that the only way to motivate ourselves is to be really hard on ourselves. And if we don't do that, we're not going to meet accomplishments, or we're not going to, quote unquote, succeed. And I think one of the beautiful gifts about neurodiversity and my ASD diagnosis was kind of being able to even redefine what success looks like and being able to lean into limits and boundaries and giving my nervous system moments when I kind of know about myself that if I'm, have a very, intense social situation or event, I'm going to probably need some time where I just kind of don't do a whole lot of anything the next day or the next, that evening. And so, I'm kind of going a couple of different tangents too, but it was really fascinating. Right. It was really fascinating to me that within the Buddhist tradition, that question was very kind of foreign, right?
Right.
And I think a lot about Dr. Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion is very much grounded in mindfulness-based practices and even some acceptance and commitment-based kind of therapeutic approaches where, again, it's really just allowing yourself to accept what is in those moments and not dictating that we need to be over here, over there. And it does apply to grief. I have so many clients that will ask me, Kailey, am I doing this grief thing correctly? And I often say to clients, grief is not a test that you need to pass, right? Like it's an experience to be carried, and it looks different for everybody. And I know I said that in the last podcast. So I'm probably going to say it in every podcast because it's so important. And I want people to know that, grief looks different for everybody. And so
it does.
Be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. I like that. Well said, Kailey.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome.
I was just going to ask if there have been, kind of circling back to our conversation about late diagnosis and adulthood, 2 things. What challenges did you find in being able to even access a diagnosis? And secondly, what resources have been helpful post-diagnosis?
Yeah. Well, I think I briefly said, because I'm self-employed, I don't have regular insurance. So getting a diagnosis and finding someplace locally that could do it, the more and more I looked, just because they wanted you to come in. They wanted you to see a counselor first, one of their counselors, or do an intake and then get the assessment. And because they're billing, they normally do bill insurance, the process became quite costly. And we were getting into like the $1,000 or more range. And I was like, that's so much money. And so that's where finding the online resource of ADHD Online was really great. And there might be other places that do it for, lower cost than what they did, which was $250. Maybe not. I don't know. But definitely there's resources out there. Don't be afraid to Google and talk to your mental health professional. If you have one, talk to your doctor, your family doctor, because they can definitely point you in the right direction too. I got a diagnosis, and then I took that diagnosis to my medical doctor, who was then able to prescribe for me. And so that was really nice having that resource. Staying in touch with my medical provider and just letting them know, hey, what's working with the medications, what's not. That's really important. And then, I have my own counselor that I see on a semi-regular basis. I think I see him every other week or once a month, and just checking in with them and talking about the process. That's been really helpful too. There is a really great There's a really great book called ADHD is Awesome, which I don't have on my desk. I think it's downstairs in the kitchen. But that's a great resource for the layperson to pick up and read. It's a fun read. It's an easy read. Talks about what it's like, what it might be like for someone that does have ADHD. Here's some things for you to be aware of if you have ADHD that you could be keeping an eye out for, or if you don't know, keep an eye out for these things. Just some basic tools. I think the main thing for someone that's neurodiverse with ADHD is structure. Structure can be really important. And I think you would say it's probably true for someone that's autistic as well.
I was just thinking that. I think structure.
Because it helps keep us on track in a way that, again, the neurotypical person can probably do more so on their own. Maybe not, but that's been my experience for myself and with the clients that I work with. What about you, Kailey?
Similar. I think finding a diagnosis is a privilege, to be frank. And so within the autistic community, we value self-diagnosis precisely because for many marginalized groups, accessing care is a challenge. And so, as a white cisgendered woman, I have a lot of privilege. I have a lot of privilege. And so, for me, finding a counselor who specialized in this was difficult, particularly late diagnosis. You typically it's still a challenge, but you have more counselors and providers who do work in this realm with children and adolescents. Although, again, we need far more of those as well. Yeah, we do. But it does become even more, I think, challenging in adulthood. So for me, finding somebody that specialized was tricky. It took a little bit. I think just also the internalized ableism of, do I want a diagnosis? What does this mean? Feeling some shame. Because
I don't think, speaking from our personal experiences, Kailey, I don't think you ever maybe went about, you took a lot of steps to pursue a diagnosis, but I think you stopped short of an official diagnosis. You had done enough research and then had met with a mental health professional that very much validated for you. We can go the route of getting you an official diagnosis, but for sure, this is what you're dealing with. And here's all the evidence that says that.
Right. We did pieces and parts of what would be kind of a full battery assessment, but there were some elements that you would need if you were wanting to qualify for things like disability, or if you were in a school setting and needing access to IEPs or 504 accommodation type plans. So we kind of piecemealed some things. And definitely really value that I had a counselor that was willing to kind of do that with me, saw that I was anxious, again, totally was able to see things that I wasn't seeing. She asked me a question about stimming, which is really kind of involuntary body motions that we do to kind of de-stress. I often think about, if you have a dog and they get really stress, what do they do after? They kind of shake it off, right? So we all stim, but those of us who are neurodiverse tend to do that much more, right? And so she was even able to pick up on some of my stimming behavior that I didn't even notice. So again, diagnosis is a privilege. For me, also resources. There's a wonderful book that was kind of the first that led me down this path called Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devin Price. Devin is a non-binary individual, and his experience was just very resonant, highly academic, but really struggled with some internal stuff and being able to kind of process and navigate. I think one thing that's also been super helpful for me is learning, and I already hinted at this, but learning what my limits are. I still sometimes really suck at this.
You're terrible at it.
I know, I am.
You're terrible. It's very clear with Kailey. Kailey, there's a cutoff for work, and it's this time. And sure enough, I come down the stairs, and who's still on their laptop trying to do work? Like, Kailey, what time is it?
Yeah, I know. Again, though,
I say it with all the love in my heart.
Again, this is such a Western American thing that we feel that having needs, having boundaries somehow make us weak. We like to joke. We like to joke in our house that we don't believe laziness is a concept that exists because there's always, I think, so much going on. Behavior is always just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
All behavior is communication. Sure. All behavior is, right? And so I think just to label somebody as lazy or that their behavior is lazy, I think you're missing a large piece of that picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where, and don't want to get too political here, but like when we hear things about Medicaid getting cut or more work requirements being put on it, like that's not going to help anyone because the issue isn't that people are inherently lazy. There are a number of factors that keep people from being able to maintain a job, have a full-time job. What we should really be doing is increasing Medicaid and Medicare access, and we should be increasing the way that we provide that to people and get them the mental health they need. That's what's going to make people more productive, not putting requirements on things, which just breaks my brain that we have been doing this for decades, and it doesn't work for a reason. Why can't we just have universal health care and say people get it? Why do we have to put a requirement on it? Anyway. Yeah. That was my side tangent into the political. I know we talked about this a little bit. I don't know if you said how you feel like your autism might impact your personal relationships, our relationship, romance, or just relationships with friends. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think this is a good moment to bring up the concept of masking, which is where we kind of mimic behavior so that we feel as if we're fitting in. It's very normal for those of us who are autistic. A really big example of this, and this is a really silly example, but I think it paints the picture, was several years ago. I had been asked to facilitate a grief support group at a local church, and there was a group of individuals who wanted to just talk with me before, just to kind of see, if I was aligned with what they were wanting in their group. And they began to talk about an author, and I won't say the name, but it's an author I don't particularly care for. And
say the name.
No,
say
I'm not
it.
Gonna, no.
Oh, boo, boring.
But I found myself in that moment almost like I became a different person, and I, spoke, oh, I love that author. And, and it was exhausting. I came home exhausted. And when we pretend and we mimic, I think that we eventually wear ourselves out. So I think it certainly has shown up in relationships where I feel like I'm kind of pretending or mimicking certain things, scripting a lot ahead of time. Like, it's very anxiety inducing to just be thrown into a social situation. I always kind of have to map out like who's going to be there, like what's going to be talked about, where am I going to sit, who am I sitting next to. There's a lot of like mental preparation that goes into social interactions. Again, I think it's a misconception, though, to say that like autistic people don't know how to engage with other folks. That's just not true. In fact, research actually has shared that neurodiverse people, we get each other and we connect really well. It's just a challenge sometimes in social situations where maybe we feel like we have to kind of mask or put on these certain personas. Again, though, think about, gosh, I think that happens outside of the realm of neurodiversity too, right? How many times do we feel like maybe we have to put on those personas in order to fit into certain situations. And I think that that's not true belonging, though.
Yeah.
That's just fitting in.
Right.
But I think what we really want as humans is to belong.
No, absolutely. I agree 1,000%. So thinking about a couple other questions that I wanted to ask, because I don't want to keep our listener here too long, but one more question, especially in regards to our personal life, like have you in particular with the neurodiversity diagnosis or just in general faced any sort of stigma or misunderstanding from people close to you? I know you kind of already touched on that a little bit, but then how do you navigate it? Because you mentioned the masking, as a way to navigate. But yeah, what comes up for you as I'm asking you that question, Kailey?
Again, I have a lot of privilege as a white woman. And so there's certain, I think there's certain things that, an individual who is marginalized, who's also autistic, is going to face at a much different level than I have. I think academically, I've always done really well academically, but there are certain just parts of the academic world that are really unfriendly to autistic individuals just by nature of, even something is, to me, this is a little bit of a silly example, but just even the process of interviewing for teaching faculty positions, often the amount of emotional toll that takes on somebody with neurodiversity, to do full day interviews and multiple interviews, the waiting, which is just really hard for somebody, again, with autism who likes to know what's around the corner. The idea that you need to present yourself in a certain way in academic settings. And then again, that's freaking tiring, And so I think, certainly in that realm, yes. But I think for me, a lot of it has been more internalized ableism, internally beating myself up that I need to meet certain benchmarks and expectations. Again, instead of just honoring what my body might need in those moments, allowing myself to rest. So I think a lot of it has been internal.
Yeah. What would say your forms of self-care look like when you need to rest?
Great question.
You like to read,
I love to read. I like to play with our dogs.
Yep. Puppies are a great way to self-regulate.
Animals in general are kind of a self-care for me. I love to just watch silly animal TikToks and Instagram reels.
You like to put comfort shows on television.
I do love a good comfort
Grey's Anatomy.
Show. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you? What are your
the same. Having a comfort show on television, I think that's really helpful, especially to have it on just in the background. And then, probably things like a lot of the stuff you mentioned, but I would also, for me, it would be video games. I need to take a moment and check out for an hour or so if I can. And those are great ways to do that, of just having like a mindless game to just play for a little bit. Or having a story that I can engage with, again, whether that's film, television, a video game, or a book, just something that can hold my attention and give me the space I need to clear my head and then come back to doing whatever task it is I need to do. I do know with my ADHD, if I've got something that I really need to do, it's okay, how do I, again, there's that structure piece. How do I create space to make sure I have the time to do it? Like, catching up on paperwork or documentation or doing some admin stuff with our practice. It's okay. I'm going to close the door, turn on the white noise machine, and I'm going to give myself the time to hone in and focus on this task for this period of time. And then when that time is up, or if the task is short enough, when that task is done, done, get up, move out of the space, change the location. Those are all, for me, helpful ways that I help regulate in those moments of just being able to, take care of myself and recognize I'm hitting my wall.
And we all have those. That's the thing. I'm not sure why we have an idea in our head that like you can just chug through and power through. Like we all.
Would you say that for your neurodivergence, so Kailey, it can be hard to have the insight or the the recognition that you're hitting your wall?
Totally.
Because that's what I think often happens. And I'll even hear you say it to me. I hit a wall. And I forget where we learned this or who said this, that we picked this up. But, when we hit a wall, what do we do? Like, why do we hit walls? So we can recognize that we need to lean on it, that we need to take the break, that we need to allow ourselves to just relax and to keep going would certainly, for you at least, I think all of us, but I know especially for you, we would burn out and then we would have nothing left in the tank. And that's where things like for a lot of people, depression kick in.
Or burnout,
caregiver fatigue,
all of those pieces and parts. Again, we're human, and to be human means we have limits and we have needs, and it doesn't make us needy. We're all needy.
We're needy. We're not burdens. We're just needy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So here's a question for you, Kailey. How well do you think the mental health field navigates, accommodates, and treats neurodivergent people?
Well, we've already talked about that there's still a lot of issues with access to care. I also would argue that in our training, this is not something that we really talk a ton about. I don't recall getting a lot of education on neurodiversity and how it might present differently in women. And so I think access to care, that's across the board, though that's not just for neurodiversity, but I think that's a huge issue. I also think we need to train more. We need to be doing, and I hesitate to say this because I don't mean research on a cause of autism, but research on supports and accessibility.
Yes. For the record, vaccines do not cause autism.
I knew you were going to say
lots of research that says that does not, contrary to what our current, whatever his job is, JFK Jr.'s position is, it does not cause autism.
And the question really becomes, why are we so focused on getting rid of autism? Because guess what? Human diversity in the way that our brains operates is a really, really beautiful thing. And let's make a more accessible world, right? This is a little bit of a side tangent. And then we can kind of start wrapping up. But there's these two ideas. One is called the medical model of disability. And it's the idea that whether it's a physical disability or, quote, mental disability, that those things automatically need to be, quote, cured. Right? The social model of disability says, wait a minute, what if the disabling factor here is not the diagnosis, but an inaccessible world? And the example that's always used in the social model of disability is, is it disabling to be in a wheelchair, or is it disabling to try to get into a building without a wheelchair ramp? Right. Yeah. And the answer to that is, if you don't have access, that's the disabling component here, right? It's not that you're in a wheelchair. It's that there's a building that you can't get into. I think neurodiversity is a social model of disability because it's not saying that these things are things that need to be cured. The argument is, let's create more access and really a more kind world to those whose brains and bodies don't operate in a quote unquote. And I put it in quote because there is no, we have this elusive idea of normal. But what if, there is no normal.
No, there is no normal. This kind of brings up a question that you brought up earlier, Kailey. Why do you think so many people are afraid of autism? Like they're afraid to get their kids or themselves vaccinated? Or why do you think so many people, like JFK Jr., want to find a cure? Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are so afraid of autism or any other type of neurodiversity that we have to find a cure?
Because there are challenges that need care, right? And there needs to be, but again, the solution is let's create more access to resources that would be helpful for families, right? Instead of, again, this hyper fixation on what has caused. Again, I think it's a shift in focus. Let's create communities that prioritize everyone and, create inclusive environments. Inclusivity, I think, is so much more. I always say accessibility and inclusivity are so much more than just a wheelchair ramp. It's a posture. It's an attitude. It is, again, let's make sure everybody has a seat at the table in whatever way that looks, and really value every person at the table.
Do you think that's hard for people because of maybe that basic fear of the unknown? Like, because I don't know it. It's a lack of
exposure. It's a lack of, it's why I'm a big advocate. I think that, to not have segregated classrooms where you take, students with disabilities into their own, classrooms, because I think having integration is so important for not just students with disabilities, but students without disabilities, right? It's exposure. It is a way that we are, again, creating tables where everyone has a place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I think it's a unique way to view the world that a lot of people struggle to, because again, most people are neurotypical. And when we see the neurodiversity and we can't understand it, again, we look for a scapegoat, or we look for something to blame that could be causing it, as opposed to acknowledging that, hey, it's okay that I don't understand this. I wonder if that goes also with the idea, and I see this happen with a lot of people, especially I think even in my own extended family, of like the need to have an answer, or the need to be able to do it the right way. And there's that fear of like, if I don't have the answer, if I don't know how to do it the right way, I'm wrong. And there's that self-critical piece that we've been talking about for the neurotypical person, or even the neurodivergent person, or the person that doesn't know they're neurodivergent. Like, I have to have an answer. And because I don't have an answer, what does that say about me? What do you think about that? Am I hitting something there? Am I just fucking crazy?
Well, I mean,
don't answer it. Okay. Let me reframe the question. Do you think I'm hitting something there? We'll scratch the last part.
Absolutely. We fear what we don't know, or maybe more so we fear when we see things in other people that maybe touch a little close to home, right? Blame is just deflected shame. We don't want to sit with it, so we hot potato it out, right? But I think this is why this is really cheesy, but this comes all back to how important I think empathy is, right?
Yeah.
Even if we don't have the same experience as somebody,
right.
Can we just imagine, right? Can we walk around in somebody else's moccasins? It's a quote from one of my favorite kids' book, Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. But I think, can we at least learn about this other perspective? The world is big, and it's beautifully big, right? And the more that we can expose ourselves, I think, to different ways of thinking and living and being, the healthier we are as humans. That's maybe my bias, in my opinion.
Well, it's a good bias and it's a good opinion. So, all right. Kind of wrap up here. You mentioned earlier that it's kind of like a superpower. So what have been some unexpected gifts of being neurodivergent personally and professionally?
There's a quote, and I don't know who it's from, but it's what makes you weird makes you wonderful. So I'm kind of become a little more in tune with my weirdness, and I like it. But my superpower, I'm a deeply feeling person, right? And I used to think that was a liability and a bad thing. You're too sensitive. But that sensitivity is what makes me do what I do. It's kind of the core of who I am. So I like to say that my sensitivity, my empathy is kind of my superpower.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think it's important for all of us to hear that just because you're neurodivergent doesn't mean that you're less than. In fact, in a lot of ways, it gives you insight. It gives you the ability to maybe approach problems or think about things in a way that the neurotypical person can't or wouldn't. And yeah, that's a wonderful superpower to have.
What about you?
What about me? Ditto. Samesies. So this is a funny little antidote. That's not the right word. What's the word I want?
Anecdote.
Antidote. I'm not gonna be able to say it. I want to say the word antidote as if someone's poisoned me.
Right.
a funny little side story. How about that? I have a group of buddies I love to play board games with, and they give me the hardest time because anytime we learn a new game, first of all, they will sit there and explain. Many of them are neurotypical. I'm sure there's some neurodiversity amongst us for sure. But they will sit there. They will explain the person who brought the game, who has read the rules, will explain it. They'll explain it in detail. They'll take a good 5-10 minutes so everybody teaches it. And then we'll start up and I'll be like, okay, wait, what? Tell me again. So I don't catch any of the rules. I learn on the fly. And sure enough, somehow, more often than not, I end up winning, even though I didn't catch all the rules, know how to play. And I think that says something about my neurodiversity of with the ADD. I have to do it. And if I can do it, I can learn it. And I can probably learn it really well better than to have somebody just, lecture to me, at me, and tell me how to do it. If I get in there and I do it myself, I'll know how to do it and know how to do it maybe better than other people might the first time out. And so that in a lot of ways is my superpower of that. If I can get my brain to figure out how it works in doing it on my own, it'll click and it'll stay with me in a way that it wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah.
So yeah,
there's so much to be said for like different ways of learning. And that's as an educator, I'm really passionate about there's not just one way to impart knowledge. And I think for many of us with neurodiversity, there is a sense of like, we need to maybe do it, or we need to really ingest a concept differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why, especially, in college, I think in middle school, high school, but especially in college, like it was so hard because you have to, a lot of it's writing papers, or a lot of it's doing some of those lecture, take notes, and then take a test. Like that was so hard for me because my neurodiverse brain would get so distracted so easily. I'd be sitting there listening to a lecture, and I appreciate a good lecture. I really do. But my brain would just go off in a million different tangents, and then 15 minutes will go by and I would have no idea what was just said, what was on the slides. And then I got to go figure it out, which already I'm not engaged enough to do that. Yeah. And so I remember one time in college, I walked into a classroom. Actually, I didn't walk in the classroom. I walked to the door. I was late and I peeked my head through the window and I saw they were taking a test. I turned around and ran. I was like, I'm sick today because I didn't study. I forgot we were taking a test.
Yeah.
But that for the neurodivergent person happens more often than not. And so again, you're right. Can we find different ways that we can be creative in learning the lesson? And I remember certain courses that I took in high school and college and elsewhere where the more, when we had like an active, like fun engagement between the class, between groups. Yeah. I often did walk away with more knowledge in hindsight, and knowing now that's that neurodiversity piece. So we always like to end by asking the question, what are we reading, watching, or playing? Kailey, what are you reading, watching, or playing right now?
I'm going to probably take your answer. We're watching The Last of Us right now.
That should be our next podcast. We should do a podcast.
That's a great idea.
On The Last of Us. Yes, because the season 2 finale is airing tomorrow. Very exciting. So we're watching that. What are you reading? Anything good?
Yeah, actually, and it's relevant to our topic today. I'm about halfway through a book called When the Naughty Step Doesn't Work. And it's about discipline and how, quote unquote, traditional discipline, guess what? Doesn't work for neurodiverse kiddos, nor does it really work for anybody, in my opinion. When we try to get a kid to comply, never goes well. So great. It's a great book so far. I'll report back more.
Please do. I'm reading the book How Fascism Works by Jason Stanley. It's a great book. It's a pretty easy read. It's a very frightening read considering things happening in the world right now and in our country. But I think it's an important book, and it's really good. It's a really great book. You're not much of a gamer. Have you been playing anything, Kailey?
No, negative.
No. All right. I have been playing The Last of Us Part 2 because The Last of Us Season 2 is taken from that game. So I actually just finished, I think, my second or third playthrough of that game last night. Talk about an exercise in empathy. Oh my gosh, it is all
we
at
should,
once.
Yeah, we should definitely do a whole
devastating,
episode.
heartbreaking. Well, we can't talk about what happens at the end of Last of Us Part 2 because season 2 is going to end, I think, on the middle of the game. But man, if you're a gamer and you want to experience a devastating yet powerful game that forces you to make choices and stretch the boundaries of empathy for these characters, go play The Last of Us Part 2. It's a great game. It's, I got a couple of favorite games, but I probably is one of the best, if not the best video game I think I've ever played. It's so good. Just because of what it makes you do as the player, what it forces you to do. So it's also, caveat, incredibly violent. Probably one of the most violent games you'll play, but for a reason. There's a real good reason for it. So, all right. Anything else before we got here, Kailey?
I don't think so. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for asking questions. Were you saying that to me or were you saying it to the audience member? Thanks for listening.
All the above.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. All right. I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for listening. And we'll hopefully be back with some more podcasts soon. And we've talked about having a couple of guests on. So maybe we'll be doing some of that. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.
Can't it hard help me speak the words that no one said?